had an aspiration to do digital transformation to improve uptime in the company. They had a very, very critical asset, a rotating machine, and they had a high temperature alarm on the motor, which was a water-cooled drive. Excuse me. The vibration readings they investigated quickly were normal. So acoustic readings were normal. What they did was they changed the motor. This was a big motor. It was expensive, $65,000. It took 238 man-hours of labor to change that motor. It's at a difficult to access location in the plant. And it actually caused 96 hours of downtime, which had a significant impact on lost revenue, over $2 million. Now, the company undertook an approach at about this time to start deploying technology and trying to marry up the IT and the OT worlds to try to get a better understanding of equipment conditions and have a better predictive capability. And they were doing this with remote sensors from remote monitoring locations. So it was a bold big step at the time when this was done. It was quite some time ago. About a year later, while all this deployment was going on, they had the same high temperature alarm happen again. And different maintenance crew basically greased the bearing, and the alarm silenced. And they thought basically that was the root cause of the problem. We just needed to have some lubrication done, and they did, and the alarm went away. But because they had deployed more information, more sensors, combined them, and started to analyze what would it mean if these three things happened at the same time as that, what does it likely mean? They basically went back and looked at the historical parameters that were happening when the second failure occurred. And they had deployed bearing temperature sensors and ambient temperature in the area. Rotating speed, vibration was something that had already been deployed. The cooling water temperature, they were monitoring in and out, inlet and outlet. So now they had a heck of a lot more data to play with. They found in looking back at that failure that the ambient temperature, at the ambient temperature that existed at the time of that failure, the bearing temperatures at that machine were running about 30 degrees higher than all of the sister-like equipment in the other locations. That was unusual. And that without this deployment of these additional sensors, they wouldn't have been able to figure that out. Now, once that bearing was greased, they returned the motor to 140 RPM, which is what it was supposed to be set to run at, although it was a very variable speed driven piece of equipment. So it did vary in RPMs. The high temperature alarm triggered when the rotating speed increased to 160 RPM. That was an interesting find. And after they had greased the bearing, as I said, they returned it to the normal speed, and the alarm was silenced, right? They also found that the bearing temperatures were only 5 degrees above what the set point was for the alarm. So that was kind of tight, and another interesting finding. When the speed was increased to 180 RPM, this high temperature alarm would trip again. Okay. Now, when that happened, all of the individual readings and the alarms that each one of those was looking at were all normal. And it wasn't an individual sensor that gave them an indication of what the problem was. It was combining all of this information together and correlating it that eventually helped them uncover the root cause of the problem. So if for example, if there was a bearing defect in that machine, which was what the reflex was of the maintenance department, vibration would have been high, and that wasn't. The cooling water outlet temperature would have been high, and it wasn't. So in essence, using correlated multiple inputs of parameters, they were able to discover that there was a simple signal converter that brought the signal from the sensor to the control room that was faulty, and it was causing this high temperature alarm. And all they had to do was really replace that sensor for $300. There was nothing wrong with the machine. There was nothing wrong with the bearing. And that would have saved, think about the two failures that we just talked about, especially the first one, a significant amount of not only downtime, but cost. So this is a nice little succinct example of what we mean by convergence of the IT and the OT worlds and bringing all of those different inputs together. With wireless technology today, it's a lot more economical to be able to do this. When I was still, in the thick of my practice, it was very expensive to put sensors out there because wires and conduits had to be run, and it was prohibitive. You only did it on highly critical equipment back then. Now that's all changed, and that's another aspect of digital transformation, right? Wireless technology has made a lot of this stuff much more practical.